The blazing sun threw its scorching heat over Highway 66 in an almost deserted stretch where Pedro's truck, completely loaded with steel machinery, headed across the country. Because of this, the huge machine rumbled in a steady march towards the still distant horizon. Peter, a middle-aged man with broad shoulders and hands calloused by hard work, was absorbed in his thoughts, his eyes fixed on the road ahead as he struggled with the various worries that beset him. Peter was an ordinary man born in Texas, but with a heavy burden on his shoulders. He struggled to balance the demands of his personal and professional life, but sometimes felt as if he was sinking into a sea of worries and responsibilities that never seemed to end. His bills were always behind. There was a growing mountain of debt that never seemed to decrease. On the contrary, they increased every month, and it completely took away his sleep. Each month brought with it the anxiety of how he would pay for basic expenses such as food, housing, and medical care for his autistic son, Matthew, who needed monitoring and treatment. Matthew was the ray of light in Peter's life, but it was also by far his greatest concern. As a child with special needs, he required constant care and specialized attention, which added extra pressure on Pedro and his wife, Carla. They loved Matthew more than anything, but sometimes found themselves struggling to cope with the difficulties his condition brought, and found themselves alone in the midst of that struggle. It was on an especially difficult night, just before this trip, that Pedro had a difficult conversation with Carla. They were sitting at the kitchen table, the bills spread out before them, when the argument began. Pedro tried to explain to Carla that he needed to accept that burden in order to carry an extra burden to be able to pay some of the debts. "We can't go on like this, Carla," Pedro said, his voice heavy with anguish. "The bills are piling up, and I don't know how much longer we can take living in this uncertainty." Carla looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and frustration. "I know, Peter," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "But what can we do? We don't have enough money to pay for all the expenses, let alone Matthew's special needs." The already empty closets behind them gave away the difficulty they were going through. Plus, a little they risked even losing their house, the only material asset they had. Peter lowered his head, the weight of his worries weighing on him like an anchor. He desperately wanted to find a solution to his problems, but it seemed that every door was closed to him. "I know it's hard, Carla," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "but we need to find a way to move forward. By Matthew, if not by ourselves." Carla looked at him, her eyes meeting in a moment of mutual understanding. She knew Peter was struggling just as much as she was, and together they would find a way to overcome their challenges, no matter how difficult they were. "Peter, maybe you'd better work around here. The truck. It's not as profitable as it used to be, and you've been spending more and more time away from home. It's been so hard here without you." I understand. But what would I do here? We don't have a lot of jobs available around here. The truck is only right thing. I cannot just abandon." "I know you can't, but it has to have some solution. We need to figure something out to get out of this. It's something temporary. I know this storm will pass. I know, Peter, but when? And will we hold out until it passes?" It was with this thought in mind that Pedro left home that morning, ready to face another day of hard work on the road. He knew the journey ahead of him would be difficult, but he was determined to do whatever it took to take care of his family no matter what. The bright sun burned his vision and made his thoughts even more blurred. As the roar of the engine echoed around him, he closed his eyes for a moment, a silent prayer escaping his lips. "Please, my God," he muttered quietly, his hands firmly gripping the steering wheel. "Give us a light, a solution to our problems. We're fighting so hard, and I don't know how much more we can take." He felt the weight of his worries pressing against his chest, like a stone that threatened to suffocate him. But even in the midst of the darkness, he clung to the hope that something better was coming. He had to believe it. As the road stretched out in front of him, Peter felt a sense of calm settling in his heart. He knew that he was not alone on his journey, that there was someone up there listening to his prayers and guiding his way through the darkness. As long as he continued to drive and believe, he knew that he would find a way to overcome any obstacle that life put in his way. Peter drove tirelessly throughout the day, trying to bring the service forward as much as possible, then spotted a roadside diner with fluorescent lights shining invitingly against the darkness of the night. He parked his truck in the designated area and turned off the engine with a sigh of relief. The journey so far had been long and exhausting, and he was looking forward to a break to recharge his energies. In the old days, I used to take it a little lighter, but now, with all the worries, the only thing I had in mind was to drive as far as possible to finish the service as quickly as I could and return home. Upon entering the diner, Pedro was greeted by the tantalizing aroma of grilled burgers and crispy fries. He made his way to the counter and greeted the attendant with a friendly nod, while studying the menu hanging on the wall. "Good evening, sir," said the attendant with a warm smile. "What can I get for you today?" Pedro took a quick look at the menu before placing his order. "I'll have a burger and fries and a soda, please," he said, his voice tired but courteous. While waiting for his food, Pedro found an empty table near the window and settled down on it, letting out a sigh of relief as he finally felt comfortable. He took off his cap and ran his hand through his hair, already thinning from age and worries, letting out a tired yawn. As she waited, her thoughts wandered back to her family and the challenges they faced together. He wondered how Carla and Matthew were coping at that moment, if they were okay, and if he was doing enough to help them and what else he could do. Seriously thinking about what Carla had told him about trying for a job in Claremore in Oklahoma, where they currently lived. Maybe he could return to Texas and there, on familiar land, something would come up. But the way things were, they would not get money even to move. They would end up on the street, with nothing at hand. A wave of worry hit him, but he shook his head to push away these dark thoughts. He had to stay positive, he told himself. He had to believe that things would somehow get better sooner or later. When his order finally arrived, Peter thanked the attendant and began to eat with appetite. The burger was juicy and tasty, and the fries were perfectly crispy. It was a small indulgence amid the difficulties of his life, a momentary pause to recharge his energies before facing whatever the future held. After finishing his comforting meal at the diner, Pedro decided it was time to freshen up a bit before continuing his journey. He asked the attendant if they had a bathroom where he could take a quick shower, and was promptly directed to the location. Upon entering the bathroom, Pedro came across a small room with white tiles and a simple shower. He undressed slowly, leaving his dirty road clothes on the floor as he turned on the hot shower water. The comforting warmth of the water enveloped him, washing the dust and exhaustion of the day from his back. As the water poured over him, Peter closed his eyes and allowed a sense of peace and tranquility to wash over him. It was a fleeting moment of calm amid the near-constant chaos of his life, and he was determined to enjoy every second. After finishing his invigorating bath, Pedro dressed in clean clothes and left the bathroom feeling refreshed and refreshed. He thanked the attendant for his hospitality and returned to his truck, ready to rest for a while before continuing his journey. Upon entering the cab of the truck, Pedro settled into the driver's seat, arranging everything so that it turned into a comfortable bed, and then closed his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath, allowing a sense of gratitude to wash over him as he reflected on the day that had passed. With his hands clasped in a gesture of prayer, Peter addressed God in silence. He was grateful for the difficulties he had faced so far, knowing that each obstacle made him stronger and more resilient. And he also asked for strength, wisdom, and guidance to deal with what was to come, confident that God would guide him through the storms that were yet to come. After finishing his prayer, Peter settled comfortably in the driver's seat, shrouded in the darkness of the night, closing the curtains, leaving him completely in the pitch. With a sigh of relief, he gave himself up to sleep, confident that no matter what happened, he was not alone on his journey. The next morning, even before the sun rose, Peter was already on his feet. He prepared a cup of strong coffee to help him fully awaken before continuing his journey. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the cab of the truck, bringing some comfort and familiarity to the new day ahead. While sipping his hot coffee, Pedro looked out the window of the truck, watching the stars still shining in the dark sky. The stillness of the morning was still palpable, and he felt grateful to be alive and ready to face another day of challenges and adventures on the road. With the empty cup by his side, Peter said a little prayer, thanking the Lord and asking for blessings, and then started the engine of the truck and prepared to continue his journey. He adjusted the rearview mirrors, checked the tires, and checked the map to plan his route for the day. Once everything was ready, Pedro took one last look around the cabin, feeling a mixture of determination and expectation growing within him. He knew that the day ahead would be full of obstacles and uncertainties, but he was ready to face them head-on. With a determined sigh, Peter picked up the gate and began to move. The truck came to life under your care, rolling down the dark road with confidence and determination. The morning was still calm and serene, but Peter was ready to face whatever the day brought, armed with courage, faith, and a cup of hot coffee. As the day progressed and the sun rose in the sky, Pedro continued his journey without rest and without stopping to feed. Because of this, his stomach was already rumbling and he felt abdominal pain, but he was determined to continue until the end of the day. He drove for hours on end, crossing varied landscapes and deserted roads, his mind focused on the goal of reaching his destination, carrying out the delivery and returning as soon as possible. However, as the sun began to set on the horizon, Peter found himself crossing an isolated stretch of road, surrounded by a barren and desolate landscape. The road stretched in front of him, deserted and silent, with few signs of life around. Looking at the map, he did not see any inhabited points nearby. Already thinking about the night stop, he would have to drive many kilometers still until he found something. It was then that Peter noticed something in the distance. A lone figure stood by the side of the road, waving his arms in a hitchhiking gesture. As he approached, he could see that it was an elderly lady, with a heavy handbag slung over her shoulder. She was a nun, with a serene and compassionate countenance. Peter hesitated for a moment, his turbulent mind trying to process what his eyes saw. Although confused by the deserted stretch, Pedro felt a pang of compassion when he saw that lady there, alone and helpless in the middle of the vastness of the road. He knew he couldn't just walk straight past, ignoring someone who clearly needed help. It must be boiling outside, he thought, imagining the nun's discomfort under the still scorching heat of the sun that had not yet set. Despite his own concerns, Peter felt an inexplicable urge to stop and offer the stranger a ride. With a resigned sigh, Pedro slowed down and stopped the truck next to the lady. He rolled down the window and looked at her with a worried expression. "Good afternoon, sister. Do you need a ride?" he asked, his voice echoing in the stillness of the evening and the interior of the cabin. The lady smiled gratefully at Peter's words. "Yes, please," she replied, her soft voice heavy with relief. "I'm going to the nearest city, and it seems that you are the first person I meet on this road." Peter nodded in understanding and opened the passenger door, inviting the lady to enter. She settled back on the bench with a sigh of relief, and then turned to him, her deep, compassionate eyes meeting his with a serenity that surprised him. "I thank you for your kindness, my son," she replied, thanking Peter for his generosity, her soft, melodious voice bringing Peter unexpected comfort. Peter could not help noticing the calmness and dignity with which she moved, as if at peace with herself and the world around her, despite the fact that she was strangely in the middle of nowhere, as if she had been abandoned. As the truck resumed its journey down the deserted road, Pedro felt many questions arise within him. He wanted to know more about this mysterious woman who appeared so suddenly in the middle of the road, and about what led her to be in that place at that moment. "Where does the sister come from?" Peter asked, his voice heavy with curiosity. "Just going my way," the nun replied, a slight smile playing on her lips. "And you, my son? What is your destination on this journey?" Peter hesitated for a moment, his gaze returning to the road ahead of him. "I'm just going where the road takes me," he said with a laugh, his voice heavy with resignation. "Well, I have to take this cargo to Los Angeles, but if you must know, sometimes I wonder if I'm on the right track." The nun placed her hand on his, her touch soft as a comforting breeze. "The right way isn't always the easiest, my son," she said, her voice soft and comforting. "But as long as you follow with faith and courage, you will never be alone. And in the end, all paths of good lead to the same place." Peter looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and uncertainty. He knew she was right, but sometimes it was hard to believe that things would get better. As the truck continued its journey down the deserted road, Pedro felt a strange sense of calm settling in his heart. "What were you doing alone in this place? How did you get here?" "I was sent here," she answered mysteriously. "They needed me." Peter asked nothing more. Focusing on the road ahead, an asphalt ribbon stretched to the distant horizon. Peter drove in silence, his mind absorbed in thought as he processed that woman's mysterious answers, and also the words of wisdom she shared. "Are you okay?" the nun asked, her soft voice breaking the tense silence that hung over the cab of the truck. Peter nodded, his expression grim. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice sounding rougher than he'd like. "Just thinking." The nun watched him intently, her eyes penetrating his soul with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Thinking about what, my son?" she asked, her voice heavy with compassion. Peter sighed, feeling the weight of his worries deepening within him. "In my life," he confessed, his voice heavy with sadness. "In the choices I've made, in the worries of life, bills, money. Sometimes I wonder if I'm on the right track, if I've made the right choices." The nun nodded understandingly, her eyes reflecting a deep compassion. "We all face moments of doubt and uncertainty in our lives, my son," she said, her voice soft as a prayer. "But what matters is not the path we choose, but how we choose to walk that path." Peter looked at her, her words echoing within him like a distant echo. He knew she was right, but sometimes it was hard to believe that things could be different. As the sun set on the distant horizon, casting its golden rays over the desolate landscape, Peter felt a sense of unease deepening within him. The late afternoons were somehow terrible. They were when he remembered his wife, his son, and the difficulties. It was at that moment that his mistakes and failures began to haunt him, like dark shadows creeping around him. The nun watched him intently, her expression worried. "What is it, my son?" she asked, her soft voice echoing in the cab of the truck. Peter nodded, his mind immersed in painful memories. "I'm fine," he lied, his voice rough and charged with emotion. "I'm just hungry, we'll stop soon. There's a post from here a few kilometers." The nun placed her hand on his, her touch soft as a comforting breeze. Peter looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and gratitude. The truck sped along the deserted road, the roar of the engine echoing in the air as Peter and the nun rode together in silence. The sun finally set on the distant horizon, casting a golden light over the desolate landscape as night slowly approached, when they finally found an establishment where Pedro stopped the truck. Upon entering the small restaurant attached to the roadside stand, Peter and the nun were greeted by the comforting warmth of the surroundings and the tantalizing smell of fresh food. "Are you hungry, ma'am?" Peter asked, noting the soft expression on the nun's face. "A little, yes. The journey has been long and I am grateful for this moment of rest and feeding," she replied, smiling gently. Peter nodded, feeling relieved to be able to provide a moment of comfort to that woman he had met on the deserted road. After placing their orders at the counter, Peter and the nun sat down at a nearby table. As they waited for food, Peter looked at the nun beside him, his mind absorbed in thought. He knew there was much about her that still intrigued him, something beyond her serene presence and deep compassion. "What brought you to this desolate road, sister?" he asked, breaking the silence that hung over them. The nun looked at him, her eyes shining with an ancient wisdom. "I have come to offer a blessing to all those who cross my path," she replied, smiling, her soft, melodious voice charged with meaning. "And you, my son?" She asked. Peter hesitated for a moment, his mind struggling to find an answer. That's when he decided to open up a little more about his life. Maybe she could help him in some way. With an outside view, maybe he could understand the problems. "You know, ma'am, it's not easy to keep this trucking business going. With the unstable economy and rising fuel prices, I have been facing a lot of difficulties lately," he began, looking at the nun sincerely. The nun bowed her head in understanding, encouraging him to continue. "And I have an autistic son. He needs specialist monitoring, which has also been a major concern for me. Sometimes I feel that I am fighting alone against the world," Pedro confessed, venting the worries that had been plaguing his mind. The nun listened intently, her compassionate expression conveying empathy and solidarity. "And because of all this, late bills, stress, I feel like my marriage is hanging by a thread. It hasn't been easy at all. You are not alone, Peter. Sometimes it is in the most difficult moments that we discover the true power of faith and community. I'm here to listen and offer my support in any way I can," she said, placing her hand gently on his. Peter felt a lump form in his throat, touched by the nun's generosity and compassion. He smiled, feeling grateful to have found a kind and supportive soul amid the loneliness of the road. The stew they ordered finally arrived, and as they ate they continued to talk. Peter and the nun shared some stories and life experiences, finding comfort and camaraderie in each other. Time seemed to slow down around them, allowing them to enjoy the simple joy of a shared meal in the company of an unexpected friend. After they finished eating, Peter looked at her, a feeling of gratitude settling in his heart. "Thank you, sister," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "for being here, for your words of wisdom. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I'm grateful to have found her." The nun smiled at him, her smile illuminating the darkness of the approaching night. "The pleasure is all mine, my son," she replied, her voice soft and comforting. "I thank you for the ride. Well, I'll pay the bill, and after that we can drive to the nearest town. It's only a few kilometers from here. You don't have to worry about me, son. I'll stay right here." "Are you sure?" "Yes, they have some rooms available. I will sleep here and tomorrow I will continue my journey." "Well, I'll sleep around here in the truck. Tomorrow I can take you even further ahead. Don't worry about me anymore, son. I just want you to take this envelope with you. I left a note inside. You'll understand when the time comes. May the path before you be illuminated by a light that never goes out." After saying goodbye to the nun, Peter felt lighter, but still confused by the unexpected encounter. After bathing, he went to the truck, parking it in a quiet area of the post. Turning off the engine, Peter sat for a few moments, lost in thought. He took the envelope that the nun had given him and held it in his hands for an instant, wondering what could be inside. With a sense of expectation, Peter opened the envelope and took out the paper that was inside. His eyes fixed on the numbers written there, and he frowned, trying to understand the meaning of those seemingly random sequences. "What will it be?" he muttered to himself, examining the numbers once more. Try as he might, Peter could not decipher what those numbers represented. He felt frustrated and confused, unable to find any meaning or context for that cryptic message. With a resigned sigh, Peter folded the paper and put it back in the envelope. He knew he couldn't solve the mystery at that moment and decided to put it aside for now. Before retiring to sleep, Peter said a brief silent prayer, asking for guidance and wisdom amid the confusion he was feeling. He relied on the power of faith to guide him through the challenges that awaited him. With a slightly lighter heart, Pedro settled into the cab of the truck and closed his eyes, letting himself be carried away by the fatigue that had accumulated throughout the day, trusting that, in time, the answers would come. Upon awakening the next morning, Peter felt an urgent urge to look for the nun. He wanted to clarify the mystery of the numbers, and also thank you again for your support and guidance. Pedro got out of the truck and went to the station where he had left the nun the night before. However, when he got there, he did not see her anywhere. He approached the counter and asked the attendant if he had seen a nun over there, if that lady had already woken up. "I'm sorry, sir, but I haven't seen any nuns around here," the attendant replied, shaking his head in denial. "How not? It's a lady who came with me here yesterday. She said she would sleep in one of these rooms." "Look, sir, no lady slept in our rooms yesterday." Peter felt a shiver of worry run down his spine. Where would the nun be? Why would she have left so suddenly? Determined to find answers, Peter began asking the other employees and customers of the post if anyone had seen the nun. However, no one seemed to have seen her or remember her. Each negative response increased Peter's uneasiness. With a heavy heart, Pedro realized that he would have no answers at that moment, and after drinking a strong coffee, he returned to his truck, carrying with him the envelope with the enigmatic numbers as a reminder of the meeting with the nun. As he drove down the road, Peter couldn't stop thinking about the nun and what she represented. He knew that this was not a simple coincidence, and that there was a very big mystery still there. Driving along the endless roads, Peter took with him not only the physical load he carried, but also the emotional burden of the meeting with the nun and the mystery of the enigmatic numbers, which puzzled him so much that his worries were eventually put aside. As he got closer to Los Angeles, he felt more and more eager to complete his delivery and return home, and really soon arrived. The trip after that encounter went smoothly. Upon reaching the bustling metropolis, Pedro navigated the congested streets, expertly guiding his truck to the final destination. He parked in front of the designated destination, feeling a relief mixed with the tension that always accompanied him at each delivery. Efficiently unloading the cargo, Peter delivered the goods to the addressees, fulfilling his part in the contract. He took a deep breath, feeling a weight being lifted from his shoulders as he said goodbye to the satisfied customers. With Los Angeles now behind him, Pedro began the long journey home. The way back seemed longer than the way out, with each mile traveled bringing with it a sense of anticipation and trepidation, but everything was traveled without major problems. As he drove along the familiar roads, Peter reflected on the events of the past few days. He wondered about the meaning of the meeting with the nun and what the enigmatic numbers could represent. A sense of unease consumed him, propelling him to seek answers to the mysteries that surrounded him. When Peter finally got home, he felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. He turned off the engine of the truck and went down, stretching his tired limbs after hours on the road. With heavy steps, Peter entered his house, receiving a warm hug from his wife and a shy smile from his son. He knew he had a lot to share with them, but for now, he decided to keep his thoughts to himself. As night fell outside and the family gathered for dinner, Peter sat at the table, lost in his own thoughts. "Honey, how was the trip?" "F.O. quiet," he replied. "Only one thing intrigued me. I gave a ride to a nun and she just disappeared after that." "How strange," commented Carla. "It reminds me, yesterday afternoon I met a lady on the street. She was selling some Mega Millions tickets." "And you're playing it?" Peter asked, laughing at the situation. "No, that's not it," he answered as he rummaged in the closet, picking up the note he had left in storage. "But the lady told me to bring a note for my husband. She said he would know what to do." "Well, in any case it is not very expensive. It does not hurt to try." At that moment Peter shuddered, feeling a shiver run through his whole body, and searched desperately for the envelope stored in his pocket. And there were the numbers that the nun had given him. "Undersakar, Carla, you can call me crazy, but Pedro and Carla played Mega Millions with the numbers the nun handed them. They won the prize and became millionaires. Matthew was able to receive proper treatment, and the two were able to live peacefully for the rest of their lives, never worrying about bills or money again. Peter never knew who the mysterious nun he encountered was, and he realized he hadn't even asked her name. Thank you very much to those who have supported the channel financially through the link in the comment pinned. This helps me to bring more and more stories to you. And don't forget to like and also subscribe to continue receiving the new stories.